Hi, everyone. Today, what we're going to do is continue to get through the Theory of the Leisure class, our first book of the semester. So, last class just provided a little bit of a background into Veblen. Again, keeping in mind we're in the middle years section of our class, still within the American social theory part. So, what we do see is kind of a focus on the individual, how individuals are thinking, how individuals are acting. We'll see that emphasis on the micro level, along with highlighting the human agency involved when it comes to being aware of situations and kind of acting with intentions. So we get kind of what we're talking about with the earlier theories, Cooley, Mead, Du Bois. We'll get that here as well, but also we'll go back up to that macro level to recognize the influence of such things as urbanization, culture, and capitalism. So, as a theory of social stratification, we're looking at um, basically Veblen trying to explain to readers that class distinction forms, basically on how you distinguish one class from another. It changes over time, and he's interested to look at class distinction forms in modernity. So, again, the two main social forces that are different modernity compared to pre modernity are the emergences of capitalism and the emergence of urbanization. And so here we start to get into how he's explaining the new class forms, the new ways to distinguish yourself from other people in a modern society. So Veblen believes that to kind of create this vertical ordering, to compete and kind of dominate other people, it's instinctual. So he says we have these instinctual desires to compete, to try to dominate other people. But how we do this, the competition itself changes from one history to another. So again, this new history of modernity is important because it reorganizes how the game is played. So, we have kind of new weapons, new ways to use the weapons, and that's a reflection of our new history. So overall, in modern society, the possession of wealth and possession of property become kind of the measuring sticks with which we kind of stack people on top of each other or stack people below other people. And like I mentioned before, this is problematic because you don't know somebody's bank account. You don't know somebody's personal wealth just by looking at them. And in more and more urban societies, you don't know a lot of people. So in smaller areas, maybe you would get to know people in terms of their wealth and property ownership. But in more urban spaces, you don't know that information. So now we start to get into how we start to play these games where the battles of modernity, when it comes to class distinction, become very symbolic in nature. So that's what we're looking at, the symbolic battle of modern society. And when looking at this, we say that these comparisons that we talked about last class, basically we're looking at different types of symbolism involved in actions and kind of what people do, or perhaps, what people don't do. And so money is a factor because you need money to give a lot of these different performances we're going to talk about. But the performance itself becomes kind of the key because we use these performances to rank people symbolically. And we'll get into kind of three different ways of doing that today. So, through these different performances, through these different actions, people can project their class standing to other people. So, again, you're not telling them your bank accounts, you're not telling them how much property you own, but by kind of what you're doing, you signify to other people your class standing. And people read this. And so we'll get into this next class more. But basically, it's a culture that we learn, and we learn how to read. And based upon those readings, we place people in that kind of vertical ordering. The class distinctions of modernity begin to emerge. So we'll break down these performances in three different ways today. First, we'll look at the dimension of work and how that ties into status. And then we'll get into the dimension of leisure. and then we'll finally wrap up today with the dimension of consumption. So again, work, uh, leisure, consumption become kind of things that you do or things that you don't do. And these things carry a symbolic significance. And we use the symbolic significance to create that yardstick, placing people on top of other people, placing people below other people based upon kind of where you fall in line with the measurements. So basically, we start to see a theme, and the theme we'll see again, again, and again is that according to Veblen, being wasteful, being non-productive, is basically a positive thing in modern society. When you live in a kind of capitalist society where wealth is basically the primary way we rank people, um, waste in different forms becomes something that carries high status. Compared to the past, kind of pre-modern societies, waste was seen as something very bad. Waste was something you wanted to avoid. You know, you didn't create more food than you needed. You didn't create more resources than you needed because the resources would go to waste. But in a capitalist society, Veblen basically turns that on its head, and waste becomes a status symbol. And so we first see this with respect to work. And so, how is work used as a measuring stick? And basically, he says that the more your distance in yourself from productive work, so the more separated you are from productive work, work that's simply like producing things that we need to live, the food, the shelter, um, the clothing, basically the things we need for livelihood, he considers to be kind of productive work, people making those things. But Veblen says kind of the further away you are from productive work, the more status you have. And so, in other words, productive work typically is done by the working class individuals, those who are kind of lower on the class standing. So basically, it says, those people who are not producing anything that's kind of tangible and productive for society, those type of jobs, or the kind of further away you are from the productive jobs, that's what carries the most status in society. And so the type of work. And so, okay, you want to be away from what we consider to be productive work. So the non-productive work carries more status, but also we can say that the non-material production. So, when you are, working, so we'll go back and, ideally, you're not working at all, and that would carry the most status. So, maybe you inherit a lot of wealth, so you don't have to work. Maybe you already made a lot of money, so you retired early. So not working at all, according to Veblen, would be kind of the highest. But if you are working, kind of the mental work, not working with your hands, more working with your mind, carries the most status. So if you're doing kind of mental work rather than work with your hands, more physical work, that mental work carries more status. And then again, you kind of go down from there, the vertical ordering, kind of the work that you're really kind of doing hands-on would carry kind of the most stigma rather than the most prestige. And so a third way we can look at this is status fluctuates with respect to with whom you're working. So here again, you want to distance yourself from the working class. So, you want to be working with other leisure class, other wealthy individuals, and kind of the further away you are from kind of the working class, then the more status you have. So again, I say this kind of ties into wastefulness being a positive thing because, you're not really being productive if you're not working at all. And kind of a lot of the mind work is important, but you're not actually producing what we need to live. That type of work is done with your hands by the working class. And you kind of are distancing yourself from those who are actually being productive. And when you're separated from them again, you're kind of being more wasteful than productive. So the second dimension here we'll talk about is leisure and status. So that's kind of one measuring stick we can use, work and status and how those two come together to create that vertical ordering. And now we'll look at the variable of leisure and how that connects to status and how we create that symbolic measurement stick of modernity. And so basically here, again, we see wastefulness being something that carries high status. So with leisure, basically, the more non-productive time you have, the better. And so basically, when you're at leisure all the time, when you're not working, and that carries high symbolic significance. And he says that for the most part, this symbolism here connected to leisure outweighs the symbolism connected to work, connected to consumption. Now, they may kind of change according to the situation, but overall, if you had to pick one, you say that, the leisure is more important compared to the work and compared to the consumption practices we'll talk about shortly. So basically, being absent from productive time, that carries the most status. So the more you're away from actual work, the more you're at leisure, the more status you're going to get. And there are a couple of different kind of sub leisures he gets into. Derivative leisure basically is looking at your family members. So again, keep in mind this is a time period where the wealthy families, the wealth is coming from the male and the family. So men basically were doing the work, getting the money. So he says the male can enhance his status not only by what he does individually or what he doesn't do, but also by the family members around him. So, if you allow your wife to live this lifestyle of leisure, if you allow your kids, to, go to all these boarding schools and go take these vacations all the time, the more status you're going to get. So just like yourself, the less productive you are, the more at leisure you are, the more status you get. And the same thing kind of goes with your family as well. The more at leisure they are, the less productive they are, the more status you're going to obtain as a result. And again, all this basically shows how much money you have. So go back to work. If you're not working a lot, then that shows that you have a lot of money because you don't need to work. Here, the money is kind of evident because you're at leisure all the time, and only those who can be at leisure all the time and their family members, only those are people who have the money to be at leisure. So again, it's kind of a reflection of how much wealth you have by showing people, how much you work or how much you don't work. And so the vicarious leisure, kind of another subset here, and basically gets into the role of servants. So you have people kind of working for you, and basically the more servants you have, the more status is kind of reflected back to you, and also kind of the more trained they are, the better off you look as well. So if you have a bunch of people kind of doing the work and they're very good at kind of what they do, whether it be kind of in the kitchen or the gardening or the yard maintenance, the more people you have doing that for you and kind of better they are at doing it, the higher status you're going to receive from other people as a result. So again, Bevelin would say if you're doing your own cooking, then that's going to uh, kind of work against you compared to somebody who has a cook doing the cooking for them. Again, this shows other people that you have enough money to pay other people to do it rather than doing it yourself. So again, all this goes back, symbolically speaking, to kind of identify kind of where you are in relation to other people based upon your wealth. Because you don't tell people your wealth, you demonstrate it by the work you do or the work you don't do, with whom you're working, with whom you're not working, and by your leisure activities and by kind of the people around you and their leisure activities as well. So finally, we kind of see that wastefulness going on, not only being kind of non-productive, kind of being at leisure, and all the people around you kind of being non-productive and at leisure as well. Here we say consumption being an important status marker. And so basically, you're collecting non-productive goods. So things that, hang on your wall, like art or, different pieces of jewelry you may have, different cars. So basically, things aren't really producing anything for you. And so the more you kind of are consuming these items, the more status you get. And again, it ties into that theme of wastefulness being a positive thing because you have all this stuff and the stuff really doesn't do anything for you. But what the stuff does show is that you have the money to afford it. And so the more stuff you buy, the more money you must have to afford it. And so again, it kind of gets into the symbolism part there. And so you can look at the specialization of goods and basically, what you're buying. So if the good is very specialized, the more status you have. And we'll come back to some of these ideas later on throughout the book as well. But basically, if something is rare, like a first edition of a book, that outweighs something that is common, like an open edition of a book. And if you have the original art piece rather than the reproduction, again, that carries more symbolism. That it's a specialty itself. If a lot of people have it, if it's easy to obtain, then it's going to carry less status than the products that are obscure and hard to obtain. So again, you start to separate yourself from other people, not only by having stuff, but how much stuff you have quantity wise, but also a kind of a quality dimension. How rare or common is it, and how kind of obscure or how kind of well known is the material. So finally, we'll get into the role of the audience. And here, basically to illustrate, these three dimensions of work, leisure, and consumption, you need other people to see it. If you do this all in a vacuum, then nobody's going to know anything about you, and they won't be able to kind of put you in that vertical ordering. So that's why it becomes kind of a performance. You're not really performing only for yourself, but you're performing for other people as well. And this gets into the idea of conspicuous consumption. And this kind of famous term from Bedlam is basically, again, you're doing this to show other people, to demonstrate to other people kind of who you are class-wise, rather than simply buying it to make yourself happy. Although the two can go together at once, again, it is kind of the two, a performance that you're putting on, but also a performance you're putting on for other people. So, other people need to kind of see this and recognize it. And then when they see it and recognize it, they can kind of put you in your proper status. So, he gives a lot of examples of how, this is done. We'll talk about dress more later on in the book. But, you can go out in public and kind of demonstrate your wealth by what you drive, what you wear, with whom you're socializing. But also you can bring kind of the public to you. You can have these big parties, you can have these big events at your house, and it's not only about the party, it's not only about the event, having fun, or perhaps raising money for a charity or something, but it's also about bringing people to you so they can see, your symbolism in work. You can see the symbolism in terms of your consumption goods, your life of leisure, you're distancing yourself from productive kind of hands-on work. So again, it's kind of interesting to look at that, because what I like about this book, maybe it's not a perfect fit for our lives today, but I think, it really does fit well in terms of how consumption today matters a lot in terms of status, even more so compared to maybe when Veblen was writing. In terms of sometimes job to carry status with it. But, today consumption really outranks people's job for the most part. And, the life of leisure, although sometimes you stigmatize people not working, you kind of recognize that person as being successful because they don't have to work. And kind of the work of the mind today still carries more prestige compared to the work of the hands. So, although maybe it's not the perfect book, not the perfect theory, I think it is very relatable to kind of how we live our lives today. So anyways, I'll leave that there. I'm gonna continue to unpack things and kind of take it more up to a macro level. So kind of keep in mind here, we're kind of focusing on the micro level, the individual, kind of doing things intentionally, displaying things, not displaying other things, to get that symbolic message across to other people. And we'll move kind of into a more macro level focus where we look at social structures such as culture that come into play to kind of bring everything together. So we'll get into that next time. And as always, if you have any questions, please let me know.